Hello. I've been sitting here longer than I meant to, staring at the same spot on the wall, waiting for the right moment to start. I've noticed I still do that. Wait for things to feel settled before I speak. Old habits don't disappear just because you recognize them. My name is Richard Bennett. I'm 78 years old. I live alone now in a house that remembers more voices than it hears. My wife Eleanor died 2 years ago. We were married for 51 years. I still catch myself thinking of time in terms of before and after her even now. The title of this video talks about laws of life. I never thought of them that way while I was living them. They weren't rules I consciously chose. They were assumptions, quiet beliefs about how life worked, what mattered, and what could safely be ignored. I followed those beliefs for most of my adult life, and by the time I understood what they had cost me, my life was already mostly behind me. One of the first things I believed was that strength meant control, keeping yourself together, not letting emotions spill out where they could complicate things. My father lived that way. He worked, came home tired, ate dinner, went to bed. He didn't talk much. No one expected him to. That was just how men were. I absorbed that without question. By the time I met Eleanor, it was already built into me. We met when I was 26 and she was 24. She was attentive in a way that felt almost unsettling at first. She noticed tone, mood, small shifts in people. She asked questions that didn't come with easy answers. I admired that about her, but I also kept a distance from it. I didn't know how to meet her there. When we got married, I promised myself I would be steady, predictable, someone she wouldn't have to worry about. I didn't realize then how often predictability turns into emotional absence. We had our sons not long after, Michael first, then David. The house filled with sound and motion. I threw myself into work. I told myself that was love in action, providing, protecting, making sure nothing fell apart. One of the laws I lived by was that if things were functioning, then they were fine. I didn't look beyond that. I didn't ask whether they were alive. Michael was expressive, curious, always asking why. I answered his questions factually and moved on. I didn't sit with them. David was quieter, more reserved. I thought that meant he was easier, less demanding. I see now that it meant he learned early not to expect much from me emotionally. Eleanor saw the difference. She always did. She mentioned it gently, never as an accusation, just observations. Michael really wants your attention. David doesn't say much, but he listens. I nodded. I acknowledged it, and then I continued exactly as I had been. Another belief I lived by was that acknowledging something was the same as dealing with it, that as long as I saw the problem, I was doing my part. I didn't understand how little acknowledgement means without action. I believed conflict was dangerous. Better to keep things smooth. Better to say less than risk saying the wrong thing. That belief shaped my marriage more than anything else. I avoided arguments so thoroughly that I also avoided honesty. Eleanor would talk in the evenings, sitting at the kitchen table long after dinner was done. She talked about her day, her thoughts, things that troubled her. I listened politely. I responded briefly. I thought I was being considerate by not escalating emotions. What I was really doing was teaching her not to bring them to me. Another law I lived by was that time would eventually make things clearer, that if something felt unresolved, it would sort itself out with enough patience. I didn't realize that time doesn't resolve anything on its own. It only amplifies what you neglect. Years passed, decades. Nothing broke. That's what makes this so difficult to explain. There was no collapse, no dramatic failure. From the outside, our life looked successful, a long marriage, 2 sons who grew into capable men, a stable home. Inside that stability, though, something was thinning out. Eleanor began to talk less, not suddenly, gradually. She stopped asking my opinion on certain things. She stopped inviting me into parts of her inner life. I interpreted that as peace, as comfort, as the natural settling of a long marriage. Another law I lived by was that comfort was a sign of success. I didn't see it as a warning. I didn't feel unhappy. I felt busy, tired, responsible. I thought that meant I was doing fine. I didn't know that numbness can masquerade as contentment for years. Eleanor talked about time more as she got older. How quickly it moved, how strange it felt. She noticed the boys changing, becoming men. She noticed herself changing. I avoided those conversations. Thinking about time unsettled me. It felt like standing too close to something I didn't want to name. She suggested small things, walks after dinner, sitting together without distractions, short trips. I treated those suggestions like optional extras, things we could do later when things slowed down. Things never slowed down. One of the last laws I lived by without realizing it was that there would always be another chance, another conversation, another year, another version of myself who would finally show up fully. Then Eleanor got sick. Cancer doesn't respect assumptions. It doesn't care how careful you've been or how well your life functioned. It arrives and demands your attention immediately. Everything I thought mattered stopped mattering overnight. Work, efficiency, routine, the beliefs I had lived by for decades offered no guidance anymore. And that was when I realized something terrifying. I had built my entire life around laws that worked, until the moment they were no longer enough. When Eleanor got sick, the laws I had lived by didn't bend. They shattered. There was no rule for how to sit with someone you love when you can't fix what's happening to them. No principle that explains what to do with fear once it has nowhere to go. I tried to fall back on what I knew: organization, efficiency, control, and found that none of it reached her. At first I stayed busy. Appointments, medications, schedules. I told myself that was how I helped. It gave me something to do with my hands, so I didn't have to sit with the feeling that I might lose her. Eleanor watched me move around the house, checking things off lists that only existed in my head. And one evening she said quietly, "You don't have to run anymore." I didn't know how to stop. I had spent my life believing that motion meant progress, that if you kept moving, you were doing something right. Sitting felt like failure. Stillness felt like surrender. It took watching my wife grow weaker to understand that there are moments when the only meaningful action is staying put. So I did, not gracefully, not consistently, but I learned to sit beside her without trying to improve the moment. I learned to listen without preparing an answer. I learned to admit when I was scared. Those were things I had always been capable of. I had just chosen not to use them. Eleanor received that version of me with a kindness that still makes my chest tighten. She never asked where it had been before. She never demanded an explanation. She simply accepted what I could give her then, and that acceptance felt heavier than anger would have. One afternoon, when she was tired but awake, she said something that stripped away the last of my defenses. She told me she had always known I cared. She paused, as if weighing the words. and then added that she hadn't always felt it. She didn't say it with bitterness. She said it like a fact she had already learned to live with. I realized then that love assumed is not the same as love felt. That belief alone had shaped my entire marriage, and I had never questioned it. When she died, the house didn't feel empty right away. At first it felt stunned, like it was waiting for her to come back from the hospital. I moved through rooms on autopilot, still following routines that no longer had a purpose. I kept expecting her voice to come from somewhere, correcting me, commenting on something small. What arrived instead was clarity. Not comfort, clarity. The laws I had followed so faithfully were suddenly visible to me, laid out like a map of where I had gone wrong. Strength without openness, stability without intimacy, control without presence, each one had seemed reasonable on its own. Together they had shaped a life that worked while it slowly hollowed out. Michael and David came by often in the beginning. They checked on me. They worried. They asked practical questions. I answered them easily. Practicality was still my language. Emotion was not. Michael tried once to talk about his mother in a deeper way. He spoke about missing her, about realizing things he wished he'd said. He paused, waiting for something from me. I felt the moment asking for honesty, for vulnerability, and I responded the way I always had, gently, safely, without opening anything up. I watched something close in his face, not anger, not disappointment, just acceptance. The same acceptance Eleanor had learned long before. David never tried. He calls every Sunday evening. He asks if I'm eating, if I need anything fixed, if I'm taking my medication. He doesn't ask how I'm feeling. I don't offer it. We both know the shape of our conversations. Changing them would feel like stepping into unfamiliar territory neither of us was trained to navigate. That's when it became clear what those laws had really cost me. They cost me the chance to be fully known by my wife while she was alive. They cost me emotional closeness with my sons while they were growing. And now they cost me the ability to cross the distance that remains between us. I don't wake up every day in despair. That wouldn't be accurate. Some days are calm. Some days even feel light. I read. I walk. I watch the seasons change outside the same windows Eleanor once stood by. But underneath all of it is an awareness that doesn't leave. I understand now that the life I built was optimized for safety, not depth, for function, not connection. The laws I followed protected me from discomfort, but they also protected me from intimacy. And intimacy, I've learned too late, is where life actually happens. I used to believe that avoiding mistakes meant I was doing well. I didn't realize that avoidance itself could be the greatest mistake. I avoided conflict, vulnerability, uncertainty, and in doing so, I avoided the very things that make a life feel full. The most painful part isn't that I broke these laws and paid for it. It's that I followed them faithfully and paid anyway. I'm 78 years old. I live alone now. I don't feel wise. I feel late. Late to understand that strength without openness is just armor. Late to understand that love has to be expressed to be felt. Late to understand that time doesn't reward caution. It exposes it. I don't share this because I think it will fix anything. It won't. Eleanor is gone. Michael and David are the men they are. The shape of my life is already set. What I have now is clarity, and clarity doesn't heal, It just shows you exactly what you're living with. Some nights, that understanding sits quietly beside me. Other nights, it fills the entire room, and I live with it, because these are the laws I ignored, and this is the life they left me with,